Hi, and welcome. Before I get into anything, what you are about to hear is one person's view, my own analysis based on the information I have come across and how I interpret it. I have spent a good part of my career working with derivatives in front office roles at large banks. That is my TradFi background. And I have been following crypto and DeFi for some years now. That combination shapes how I think about these things. But I am not a financial advisor, this is not investment advice, and I could easily be wrong on parts of this, or even totally wrong. The goal is just to share a perspective that I think is missing from most of the discussion. Take it as one input, not a conclusion, or any truth in any way for that matter. Right now, one could argue that the fee burn thesis for Ethereum looks pretty broken. ETH appears to be mildly inflationary, blob fees are close to zero, and layer 2s seem to have taken most of the activity away from the base layer. If you look at current numbers, the whole ultrasound money narrative, it is hard to defend. And honestly, on today's data, I think the bears have a point. But I think there is a big mistake in how many people apply this to the institutional adoption scenario. So what do retail users do? Simple. They tend to go to wherever is cheapest. $5 swap goes to Arbitrum. DeFi position goes to base. Cost and speed, that seems to be the logic. And from that logic you get the bearish conclusion. Institutions come to Ethereum, everything runs through layer 2, base layer barely burns anything. But my view is that institutions don't work like that, at least not for their most important transactions. The way I think about it, institutions tend to route time-critical, high-value transactions through the most certain channel, not the cheapest, the most certain, and this is not something new to crypto. Fedwire exists, Target 2 in Europe exists. The reason, as I understand it, is that there is a specific category of transaction, high-value, time-critical, where what you are really buying is finality. You are paying for reasonable certainty that the settlement is done and cannot be reversed. The fee becomes almost secondary. Now, I want to be careful here. Ethereum finality is cryptographic, not legally sovereign like Fedwire, and the legal framework for treating on-chain settlement as final, it is still being built in most jurisdictions. So I don't want to overstate the analogy, but I think the directional logic holds. And when you look at Ethereum's 2 layers, a distinction appears that I think matters a lot. Optimistic rollups, Arbitrum, Optimism, Base, they have something like a 7-day challenge window before a transaction gets unconditional. Layer 1 finality, 7 days. For something like a $500 million bond issuance or a margin call with a contractual deadline, that could be a real problem. Your compliance people, your counterparty's lawyers, your auditor, I am not sure many of them would be comfortable with final pending 7 days. ZK rollups are a different story. Starknet, ZK Sync, Polygon, ZK EVM. These appear to get cryptographic finality on layer 1 in minutes, mathematically guaranteed rather than game theoretic. So my sense is that sophisticated institutions will probably distinguish between these 2 types. They may use ZK rollups for some things and go directly to layer 1 for the most finality-sensitive settlements. The current deployments, BlackRock has their build fund on Base, which is an optimistic rollup. Those look to me more like experiments than the final architecture. The real test of whether optimistic rollup finality is legally sufficient under regulated settlement conditions, I don't think that has happened yet. If that reading is roughly right, what it means for burn is that layer 1 probably keeps a permanent role for the highest stake settlements. And ZK rollup activity also generates layer 1 fee activity through proof verification, so institutional adoption could produce more base layer fee activity than the current numbers suggest. Now here is something that I think almost nobody gets quite right when they talk about this. Ethereum gas fees, they are based on computation, not on value. A $500 million USDC transfer costs almost the same gas as a $500 transfer. The protocol doesn't know or care what the numbers mean. So the big institutional transaction doesn't automatically burn more ETH than the small one. On the surface, this looks like a serious problem for the whole thesis. But then there is the tip, the priority fee, what you pay to get into the next block instead of waiting. And the tip, unlike the base fee, it is not constrained by computation. It is constrained by what you are willing to pay. and what you are willing to pay tends to scale with what is at stake. Think about it this way. If you need to settle a $500 million position in the next block, not the next 10 blocks, because you have counterparty risk on a hard deadline, the cost of being late could be millions in exposure. In that situation, paying $100,000 as a tip to get immediate inclusion, that is basically negligible. You would pay it without much hesitation. So what you effectively get is something close to value proportional fees. Not because the protocol requires it, but because the economics of the situation produce that outcome. And there seems to be a multiplier effect, though I want to be clear, it is constrained by the protocol mechanics. When large transactions fill blocks and compete for inclusion, the base fee ratchets up. EIP 1559 allows something like 12.5% increase per block when blocks are consistently full, but a sustained wave of institutional settlements around a deadline, several consecutive full blocks, that could elevate the base fee for the whole window. Every transaction in that period would burn somewhat more ETH. And one thing I find interesting about institutional finance is that it tends to be periodic in a way that retail activity is not. Derivatives expiry cycles, quarterly rebalancing, end-of-day margining, bond settlement windows, these repeat on a calendar. But the underlying clustering of demand, I think that is structural. One honest caveat before I wrap up. This is a conditional argument, and the timeline is probably long. BlackRock's tokenized fund is around $5 billion. Avi's institutional lending product is maybe $500 million. These are real numbers, but in my view they are still small relative to what would actually move the supply numbers meaningfully. My rough estimate would be 3 to 7 years, in an optimistic scenario, before institutional Layer 1 activity reaches the scale needed to make ETH persistently deflationary through this mechanism. But I think the model many people are using has the wrong foundations. Institutional adoption is probably not retail adoption scaled up. It looks more like a different type of actor, with a different primary decision criterion, settlement certainty. These actors will tend to reveal their willingness to pay for that certainty through the tip market. They will generate Layer 1 activity through direct settlement and ZK proof verification. And they are likely to cluster that activity into calendar-driven periods that push the base fee higher across entire settlement windows. The bears, as I see it, are modeling the wrong actor, and I think that is the thing they are missing. Thanks for listening. And again, take this as one input, not a conclusion, or any truth in any way.